Hollywood shows dusty cowboys betting pocket change in quick poker hands that end in dramatic showdowns. The reality documented in frontier newspapers, gambling hall ledgers, and contemporary accounts was far different. Professional gamblers in cities like San Francisco, Denver, and New Orleans regularly played games with pots exceeding $100,000 in today's money. This was sophisticated business requiring mathematical expertise, psychological skill, and substantial capital. Before we continue, if you enjoy deep dives into the Wild West, make sure you click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more shocking stories tomorrow. Also, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the 1870s and 1880s document poker games in San Francisco, where single pots reached $10,000, equivalent to roughly $300,000 today when adjusted for inflation. The San Francisco Chronicle regularly reported on high-stakes games at establishments like the Palace Hotel and the Bella Union. These weren't spontaneous games between drifters. They were organized events involving professional gamblers who made their living through mathematical advantage and psychological manipulation. Account books preserved from gambling establishments show these professionals played regularly, maintained detailed records, and operated as businesses rather than casual gamblers. Dick Clark, one of the most successful documented professional gamblers, reportedly won over $1 million during his career, according to contemporary accounts in the Denver Rocky Mountain News. He operated in Denver from the 1860s through the 1880s, running legitimate gambling establishments and playing in private high-stakes games. George Devol's autobiography, published in 1887, provides detailed documentation of professional gambling on Mississippi riverboats where games routinely involved thousands of dollars. Devol claimed to have won over $2 million during his 40-year career. While some historians question exact figures, contemporary accounts confirm riverboat gambling involved enormous sums. The mathematical sophistication required for professional gambling was substantial. Contemporary gambling guides and instruction manuals preserved in historical archives show professionals studied probability, psychology, and game theory. This wasn't luck-based activity. It was skilled profession requiring years of training. Professional gambling halls in major frontier cities were elaborate operations. Account books and business records document staff salaries, building maintenance, security costs, and profit margins. The Palace in Denver, documented extensively in city records and newspapers, employed over 50 people and generated revenues equivalent to modern casinos. Understanding professional frontier gambling requires distinguishing between the documented high-stakes games in established cities and the Hollywood portrayal of random poker hands in saloons. Both existed, but the professional gambling economy involved far more money, sophistication, and business organization than popular culture suggests. Hollywood shows dusty cowboys betting pocket change in quick poker hands that end in dramatic showdowns. The reality documented in frontier newspapers, gambling hall ledgers, and contemporary accounts was far different. Professional gamblers in cities like San Francisco, Denver, and New Orleans regularly played games with pots exceeding $100,000 in today's money. This was sophisticated business requiring mathematical expertise, psychological skill, and substantial capital. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the 1870s and 1880s document poker games in San Francisco where single pots reached $10,000, equivalent to roughly $300,000 today when adjusted for inflation. The San Francisco Chronicle regularly reported on high-stakes games at establishments like the Palace Hotel and the Bella Union. These weren't spontaneous games between drifters. They were organized events involving professional gamblers who made their living through mathematical advantage and psychological manipulation. Account books preserved from gambling establishments show these professionals played regularly, maintained detailed records, and operated as businesses rather than casual gamblers. Dick Clark, one of the most successful documented professional gamblers, reportedly won over $1 million during his career, according to contemporary accounts in the Denver Rocky Mountain News. He operated in Denver from the 1860s through the 1880s, running legitimate gambling establishments and playing in private high-stakes games. George DeVoe's autobiography, published in 1887, provides detailed documentation of professional gambling on Mississippi riverboats, where games routinely involved thousands of dollars. DeVoe claimed to have won over $2 million during his 40-year career. While some historians question exact figures, contemporary accounts confirm riverboat gambling involved enormous sums. The mathematical sophistication required for professional gambling was substantial. Contemporary gambling guides and instruction manuals preserved in historical archives show professionals studied probability, psychology, and game theory. This wasn't luck-based activity. It was skilled profession requiring years of training. Professional gambling halls in major frontier cities were elaborate operations. Account books and business records document staff salaries, building, maintenance, security costs, and profit margins. The Palace in Denver, documented extensively in city records and newspapers, employed over 50 people and generated revenues equivalent to modern casinos. Understanding professional frontier gambling requires distinguishing between the documented high-stakes games in established cities and the Hollywood portrayal of random poker hands in saloons. Both existed, but the professional gambling economy involved far more money, sophistication, and business organization than popular culture suggests. Several professional gamblers achieved documented success and contemporary fame. Examining their careers based on newspaper accounts, business records, and contemporary sources reveals the reality of professional gambling as skilled profession. Dick Clark operated in Denver from the 1860s through 1880s. Contemporary accounts in the Rocky Mountain News document his success. He owned multiple gambling establishments, documented in city property records. His personal winnings were estimated at over $1 million, according to newspaper obituaries, when he died in 1889. Clark's operations were documented extensively. His gambling hall employed dealers, bartenders, security, and entertainment. Account books show he paid salaries, maintained elegant premises, and operated with city licenses. This was legitimate business, not criminal enterprise, during periods when gambling was legal in Denver. George DeVoe published his autobiography, 40 Years a Gambler on the Mississippi, in 1887. While some historians question specific figures, the book provides detailed documentation of riverboat gambling's economics. DeVoe describes games where single pots reached thousands of dollars, corroborated by contemporary newspaper accounts of riverboat gambling. Canada Bill Jones, documented in contemporary accounts from the 1850s, 1870s, specialized in three-card monte. Newspaper stories describe his skill and elaborate operations. He reportedly won hundreds of thousands of dollars during his career, though he also lost heavily and died relatively poor, according to his 1877 obituary. Wyatt Earp, famous as lawman, actually made more money from gambling than law enforcement, according to his account books and contemporary records. He owned gambling concessions in multiple frontier towns. Tombstone City records document his gambling licenses and business operations. His actual career was primarily professional gambler who occasionally worked in law enforcement. Doc Holliday's gambling career is well documented in contemporary accounts. He made his living primarily through poker and faro, with dental practice as secondary income. Contemporary newspapers note his presence at high-stakes games in Denver, Deadwood, and Tombstone. His documented skill was substantial, despite Hollywood focusing on his gunfighting. Luke Short operated gambling establishments in multiple frontier towns. Contemporary newspaper accounts and Business records document his success. He owned the Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City, documented in city records. His gambling operations were sophisticated businesses generating substantial revenues. Bat Masterson, like Wyatt Earp, made more money from gambling than law enforcement. Contemporary accounts document his operations in Denver and later in New York. He wrote extensively about gambling for newspapers, providing insights into professional operations. These documented careers reveal patterns. Successful professional gamblers operated legitimate businesses when laws allowed, maintained respectable appearances, had diversified income sources, and treated gambling as mathematical profession requiring skill rather than luck-based activity. The distinction between these documented professionals and Hollywood gamblers is stark. These men were businessmen who understood mathematics, managed substantial capital, maintained political connections to protect operations, and played in games involving enormous sums of money. Professional gambling required mathematical sophistication that contemporary instruction manuals and accounts document extensively. Understanding the skills involved reveals this was intellectual profession requiring years of study, not romanticized luck-based activity. Probability theory was fundamental. Contemporary gambling guides preserved in archives discuss calculating odds, expected value, and variance explicitly. The 1868 guide, The Gambler's Manual, includes mathematical tables for various games showing probability calculations professionals needed to know. In poker, professionals needed to calculate pot odds, implied odds, and expected value in real time during play. Contemporary accounts describe top players as having mathematical minds. They could assess their chances of winning, compare it to pot size, and make mathematically optimal decisions consistently. Psychology was equally important. Contemporary gambling memoirs describe reading opponents' behavior, detecting tells, and manipulating other players' perceptions. George Devon's autobiography dedicates substantial discussion to psychological tactics used to manipulate opponents into poor decisions. Memory skills were crucial for games like faro and poker. Professionals tracked cards played to calculate remaining deck composition. Contemporary accounts describe top professionals as having exceptional memories, able to recall every card played and adjust strategy accordingly. Bankroll management required mathematical understanding. Contemporary gambling guides discuss proper bet sizing, capital requirements for different stakes, and risk management. Professionals needed to understand variance and maintain sufficient reserves to weather losing streaks. Game selection was sophisticated skill. Professionals assessed which games and opponents offered best profit potential. Contemporary accounts describe professionals carefully choosing when to play based on game conditions and opposition quality. This required understanding both mathematical advantage and opponent skill levels. Emotional control was essential. Contemporary accounts emphasize that professional gamblers remained calm during both winning and losing streaks. The ability to make rational mathematical decisions regardless of recent results separated professionals from amateurs. Contemporary instruction manuals taught specific techniques for various games. The 1882 book Gambling Exposed describes dealer techniques, player strategies, and mathematical advantages for faro, poker, monte, and other games. This systematic instruction reveals gambling as learnable skill rather than inherent talent. The mathematics extended to understanding house edges in different games. Contemporary professionals knew which games offered best opportunities against casinos and which offered advantages when played skillfully against other players. This knowledge informed career decisions about which games to specialize in. Contemporary accounts note that professional gamblers often studied together, discussing strategy and mathematics. Denver gambling clubs documented in newspaper accounts served as informal schools where professionals shared knowledge and analyzed hands played. The sophistication required explains why professional gambling attracted educated men from middle or upper-class backgrounds. Census records show many professional gamblers had formal education unusual for the frontier. The intellectual demands of the profession required cognitive abilities developed through education. Gambling halls in major frontier cities were sophisticated business operations documented extensively in city records, account books, and contemporary newspapers. Understanding their operations reveals the commercial infrastructure supporting professional gambling. The Palace in Denver, documented in extensive city records and newspaper accounts, exemplifies high-end gambling establishments. Built in 1881, it occupied entire city block. Contemporary descriptions note elegant furnishings, professional staff, and security systems protecting both operators and players. Account books from Denver gambling halls preserved in historical archives show detailed business operations. Monthly expenses included staff salaries, building maintenance, alcohol purchases, entertainment costs, security, and often bribes to city officials. Total monthly operating costs could reach several $1,000s. Staff employment was substantial. Major gambling halls employed dealers for multiple tables, bartenders, security guards, musicians, cleaning staff, and managers. The Palace reportedly employed over 50 people, according to contemporary newspaper accounts. Monthly payroll records show this represented significant operating expense. Licensing and regulation varied by jurisdiction. Contemporary city records document Denver issuing gambling licenses with annual fees of several $100s. San Francisco had similar systems documented in municipal records. This provided revenue for city governments while allowing regulated gambling operations. Security was sophisticated. Contemporary accounts describe hired guards, surveillance systems, and procedures to prevent cheating by both players and staff. Account books show security represented substantial ongoing expense. Major establishments couldn't afford reputation damage from theft or cheating. The layout of professional gambling halls was carefully designed. Contemporary floor plans preserved in archives show separate areas for different stakes levels, private rooms for high-stakes games, bars, and entertainment spaces. The design maximized revenue while maintaining atmosphere, attracting wealthy clientele. Revenue sources extended beyond gambling. Contemporary account books show major establishments generated substantial income from alcohol sales, food service, and entertainment. Some operated attached hotels or theaters documented in city directories. Profit margins varied significantly. Contemporary records suggest successful gambling halls could generate monthly profits of several $1,000s, but risks were substantial. Economic downturns, competition, and changing regulations could quickly turn profits to losses. Professional gambling halls maintained relationships with local political figures. Contemporary newspaper accounts and city records document connections between gambling operators and city officials. These relationships provided protection from legal harassment and advance notice of regulatory changes. The business operations required substantial initial capital. Contemporary sources estimate establishing major gambling hall required investment of $20,000 to $50,000, equivalent to over $1 million today. This capital requirement limited gambling hall operations to wealthy entrepreneurs. The sophistication of these operations contradicts Hollywood portrayals of rough saloons with informal gambling. The documented reality shows professional business operations requiring capital, expertise, political connections, and complex management. Contemporary newspaper accounts document specific high-stakes games that reveal the enormous sums involved in professional frontier gambling. These documented games show reality far exceeding Hollywood portrayals. The San Francisco Chronicle in 1876 reported a poker game at the Palace Hotel where a single pot reached $11,000. The article noted this was unusually large, even for San Francisco's high-stakes games. Contemporary inflation calculations suggest this pot equaled roughly $330,000 today. Denver newspapers in the 1880s regularly reported on games at the Chicken Coop and other gambling halls, where nightly action routinely involved tens of thousands of dollars. The Rocky Mountain News documented one week in 1882 where estimated total money-changing hands in Denver's gambling establishments exceeded $200,000. Riverboat gambling involved equally impressive sums. Contemporary accounts in New Orleans newspapers describe games on luxury steamboats, where players bet thousands per hand. George Devol's detailed accounts of specific games are corroborated by newspaper reports from the same periods and locations. The documentation reveals that high-stakes games followed specific patterns. They typically involved 4 to 8 players, each with substantial bankrolls. Games could last multiple days with brief breaks for rest. Contemporary accounts describe marathon sessions extending 48 hours or more. The stakes varied by location and period. San Francisco and New Orleans had highest documented stakes, with games regularly involving hundreds or thousands of dollars per bet. Denver and Deadwood had substantial games, but typically at somewhat lower stakes. Smaller towns had correspondingly smaller games. Contemporary newspapers noted the social aspect of high-stakes gambling. Major games attracted spectators. Gambling halls provided food and drink. The atmosphere was social event for wealthy participants and observers. This contrasts sharply with Hollywood's portrayal of tense, isolated games. The documentation also reveals that high-stakes games were relatively safe from robbery. Contemporary accounts note that gambling halls maintained security specifically to protect games involving large sums. The presence of multiple wealthy armed participants also deterred robbery attempts. Specific documented games became legendary. An 1887 poker game in San Francisco involving Dick Clark and railroad magnates reportedly saw over $50,000 change hands in single night, according to Chronicle coverage. Specific hands and outcomes were documented in detail. Contemporary accounts distinguish between public games in gambling halls and private games in hotel rooms or private clubs. The private games often involved even higher stakes, but generated less documentation as participants preferred discretion. The seasonal variation in high-stakes gambling is documented in newspaper accounts. Spring and fall, when cattle drives and mining operations paid out, saw increased high-stakes activity. Contemporary accounts describe gambling halls preparing for these busy seasons by hiring additional staff. The documentation reveals that cheating in high-stakes games was rare, despite Hollywood emphasis on marked cards and hidden weapons. Contemporary accounts note that participants in games involving thousands of dollars had strong incentives to ensure fair play. Reputation damage from cheating wasn't worth risking access to profitable games. Understanding these documented games requires recognizing that professional gambling in major frontier cities involved sums equivalent to modern high-stakes poker tournaments. The economic scale was far larger than popular culture suggests. Women professional gamblers operated successfully in the frontier era despite social restrictions, documented in contemporary newspapers and accounts. Their stories reveal both the opportunities and limitations frontier gambling offered women. Poker. Alice Ivers is among the best documented women professional gamblers. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the 1880s-1900s describe her operating gambling tables in Deadwood and other Dakota Territory towns. She reportedly won over $250,000 during her career, according to her obituary in 1930. Alice learned gambling from her first husband, a professional dealer, according to contemporary accounts. After his death, she supported herself through professional gambling. Newspaper articles describe her smoking cigars, drinking whiskey, and competing successfully against male professional gamblers. Eleanor Dumont, known as Madame Mustache, operated gambling establishments in Nevada and California, documented in contemporary newspaper accounts from the 1850s or 1870s. She dealt vingt-et-un, blackjack, professionally and owned gambling halls in Nevada City and other mining towns. Dumont's business operations are documented in contemporary city records and newspaper accounts. She maintained elegant establishments, employed professional dealers, and attracted wealthy clientele. Her success demonstrated women could operate gambling businesses profitably despite social prejudices. Lottie Dino operated as professional gambler in Texas and New Mexico in the 1870s-1880s. Contemporary accounts describe her playing poker professionally and winning substantial sums. She maintained respectable appearance and eventually married a wealthy businessman, transitioning from gambling to legitimate society. Belle Siddons worked as professional faro dealer documented in contemporary accounts. She operated in Kansas and Missouri in the 1870s, dealing professionally in major gambling halls. Newspaper dad. Coverage noted her skill and ability to compete in male-dominated profession. The documentation reveals patterns in women's professional gambling careers. Many learned gambling from husbands or fathers who were professional gamblers. They typically operated in established gambling halls rather than traveling. They maintained more respectable appearances than male professional gamblers, aware that social reputation affected their ability to operate. Contemporary accounts note that women professional gamblers often faced additional scrutiny and restrictions. Some jurisdictions prohibited women from dealing or gambling professionally. Social disapproval was stronger for women gamblers than male counterparts. Despite these barriers, documented success stories show women could earn substantial incomes through skilled gambling. The mathematical and psychological skills required were identical for women and men. Contemporary accounts describe women professional gamblers as equally skilled at probability calculation and opponent reading. Their success demonstrated gambling skill was intellectual rather than dependent on gender-specific abilities. Women gamblers often diversified into other frontier businesses. Contemporary records show several operated boarding houses, restaurants, or hotels alongside gambling activities. This diversification provided income stability and social respectability that pure gambling careers didn't offer. The documentation of women professional gamblers is less complete than for men, reflecting both fewer women in the profession and less newspaper coverage of their activities. But surviving accounts prove women participated successfully in professional gambling despite social barriers. Hollywood portrayals of frontier gambling contradict documented reality in specific systematic ways. Contemporary accounts, account books, and newspaper coverage reveal these discrepancies clearly. Hollywood shows spontaneous poker games between strangers ending in dramatic shootouts. Contemporary accounts document that professional gambling occurred in regulated establishments, involved regular players who knew each other, and rarely led to violence because security protected profitable operations. The Hollywood gunfight over gambling disputes was rare, according to contemporary newspaper accounts. Professional gambling halls maintained security specifically to prevent violence. Disputes were typically resolved through house arbitration or exclusion from future games rather than gunfire. Hollywood shows small pots and casual betting. Contemporary account books document games routinely involving hundreds or thousands of dollars. The economic scale of professional gambling far exceeded Hollywood portrayals. Hollywood portrays gamblers as disreputable outlaws. Contemporary accounts show successful professional gamblers were often wealthy businessmen with political connections and social standing. They wore fine clothing, stayed at quality hotels, and associated with community leaders. Hollywood rarely shows the mathematical sophistication required. Contemporary gambling guides and memoirs document that professional gambling required probability calculation, psychological analysis, and sophisticated strategy. This intellectual component is largely absent from popular portrayals. Hollywood shows gambling occurring in rough saloons. Contemporary accounts document that high-stakes professional gambling occurred in elegant establishments like the Palace Hotel or in private clubs. The physical settings were far more refined than Hollywood suggests. Hollywood portrays cheating as common. Contemporary accounts note that professional high-stakes games had strong incentives for fair play. Cheating risked reputation damage and exclusion from profitable games. While cheating occurred in low-stakes tourist games, professional gamblers rarely cheated each other. Hollywood shows gambling as purely male activity. Contemporary accounts document women professional gamblers like Poker Alice and Madame Mustache operating successfully. Women participated in professional gambling despite Hollywood typically excluding them from gambling scenes. Hollywood rarely shows the business operations supporting gambling. Contemporary account books reveal gambling halls as complex businesses requiring capital, staff, licenses, and sophisticated management. This commercial infrastructure is invisible in popular portrayals. Hollywood emphasizes luck over skill. Contemporary gambling instruction manuals and memoirs document that professional gambling was a skilled profession requiring mathematical expertise and psychological acuity. Long-term success depended on skill rather than luck. Hollywood shows isolated individual gamblers. Contemporary accounts document professional gambling as social activity occurring in established communities of regular players. Gamblers knew each other, maintained reputations, and operated within social networks. Understanding these discrepancies matters because Hollywood has shaped popular understanding of frontier gambling. The documented reality of professional gambling, as sophisticated business involving substantial sums and skilled participants, is historically significant but largely unknown because entertainment priorities obscured it. The decline of frontier professional gambling is documented in contemporary newspapers, legal records, and business accounts. Understanding why this profitable industry largely disappeared reveals broader patterns in frontier economic development. Reform movements beginning in the 1880s targeted gambling as moral issue. Contemporary newspaper accounts document anti-gambling campaigns led by religious organizations and women's temperance movements. These campaigns lobbied for legal restrictions on gambling operations. State legislatures responded to reform pressures. Contemporary legal records document Nevada outlawing gambling in 1910, followed by most Western states through the 1910s-1920s. Only Nevada re-legalized gambling in 1931, documented in state legislative records. The legal restrictions devastated professional gambling operations. Contemporary account books from Denver gambling halls show declining revenues through the 1900s as legal harassment increased. Many establishments closed or converted to other businesses as documented in city directories. Professional gamblers adapted various ways. Contemporary accounts describe some moving to locations where gambling remained legal. Others transitioned to different businesses, leveraging capital accumulated through gambling into legitimate enterprises. Some continued gambling illegally in underground games. The economic integration of Western territories reduced incentives for professional gambling. As frontier regions developed stable economies with diverse employment opportunities, gambling became less attractive as profession. Contemporary census records show declining numbers listing gambling as occupation. The railroad's impact was documented in contemporary sources. Improved transportation made professional gambling's isolation advantage less significant. Wealthy players could access gambling in established cities rather than needing local establishments. World War I's economic impact accelerated decline. Contemporary accounts note that wartime restrictions, economic pressures, and social changes reduced gambling activity. Many gambling halls documented in pre-war city directories disappeared from post-war records. The professionalization of entertainment provided alternatives to gambling establishments. Contemporary accounts describe theaters, music halls, and other entertainment venues competing for spending that previously went to gambling halls. The rise of organized crime's involvement in illegal gambling changed the nature of the profession. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the 1920s describe criminal organizations controlling illegal gambling, replacing the relatively respectable professional gamblers of the frontier era. Understanding the decline reveals that frontier professional gambling was product of specific historical circumstances: weak legal enforcement, isolated wealthy populations, limited entertainment alternatives, and social acceptance. When these conditions changed, professional gambling declined rapidly. Professional gambling in the frontier era teaches specific lessons about the gap between documented history and popular mythology. Understanding what contemporary sources actually prove versus Hollywood portrayals reveals systematic patterns. First, professional gambling was sophisticated business requiring substantial capital, mathematical expertise, and political connections. Contemporary account books, newspaper coverage, and business records document operations far more complex than Hollywood portrayals suggest. Second, the economic scale involved was enormous. Contemporary accounts document single pots exceeding $10,000 and professional gamblers accumulating fortunes equivalent to tens of millions in today's money. The documented sums far exceed Hollywood's typical portrayal of small-stakes games. Third, professional gambling required intellectual skills. Contemporary gambling guides, instruction manuals, and memoirs document probability theory, psychology, and strategy as essential. This was learned profession requiring years of study, not luck-based activity. Fourth, violence associated with gambling was rare in professional establishments. Contemporary newspaper accounts show professional gambling halls maintained security and resolved disputes without violence because profitable operations required stable environments. Fifth, women participated successfully despite social barriers. Contemporary accounts document women professional gamblers earning substantial incomes and operating gambling establishments profitably. Sixth, professional gamblers were often respectable businessmen with political connections. Contemporary accounts show successful gamblers as community leaders rather than disreputable outlaws Hollywood typically portrays. Understanding these patterns matters because the documented reality of frontier professional gambling reveals sophisticated economic activity that popular culture has obscured. The historical significance lies in recognizing frontier economies supported professional activities requiring capital and expertise, contradicting narratives of the West as purely rough and primitive. If examining documented evidence about frontier professional gambling changed your perspective on Old West economics, subscribe for more historical analysis that prioritizes account books, contemporary newspapers, and business records over Hollywood mythology. Next week, the documented reality of frontier banking that proves the Wild West had more financial sophistication than modern America believes.